From the visionary mind that brought you the portable hole maker and the marvelous movable rod. The one and only Cornelius Pendergrass of Cornelius's Clever Contraptions is proud to present the Bag of Excellent Expansion. We think you'll agree the Bag of Excellent Expansion exceeds all expectations. Be the first to experience this exquisitely extraordinary example of exemplary exorbitance, as it expands exponentially to expedite the export of exaggerated proportions. Those other bags use dangerous magics that can cause all kinds of problems, or even let in the dreaded bagman to steal your children in the night. So crawl, nay, clamor to Cornelius's Clever Contraptions to snag a Bag of Excellent Expansion today.
Welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. Now, as the incredibly handsome salesperson said just a moment ago, today we're making the Bag of Excellent Expansion. Now, we have a lot to do here, so I'm not going to waste too much time. If at any point, though, you do like what you see, why don't you give me some of that thumbs up love, and don't forget to subscribe so you know when I release new content. Without much further ado, let's get right to it and level up this skill. Now, small disclaimer, if this is the first of my leathercraft videos you've seen, we've been leveling up this skill for a while, so definitely visit the playlist, link in the description below, if you feel at any point like you're lost and you need to catch up on some of the basic stuff that we cover kind of quickly here. Now, as with most projects, I had an idea of what I wanted to make. In fact, we even had a cool picture to work from here by Middle Mist Red. Everything else, though, seat of my pants. Wasn't sure how I was gonna make it expand, wasn't sure how I was gonna put it together. So to help with that, the first step was putting together a template. To do this, I decided to construct a whole bag out of this 4mm EVA foam. Now, the measurements I used here are mostly arbitrary, but if you feel like you must know to have a starting point, the front and back panels of the bag were 13 inches wide by 18 inches tall, and the two side gussets were 8 inches wide by the same 18 inches tall. Again, though, super arbitrary starting point for me, so feel free to make the bag any dimensions you like. Now, to kind of set them into bag shape so I could see how everything would fit together, I just used some of these clips and secured them all along their edges. After all 4 pieces were clipped into place, it left me with this roughly box shape with openings on either end. Now, as you can see the picture here, there's some really cool detail where the yellow pops through. Since those were main features of this bag, I really kind of needed to have some example of them to measure out the rest of the bag so they fit in correctly. Now, I could have just printed them and cut them out, but you know, we're on a time limit here. So I had my Cricut cutter do all of the hard work. With those as my guide, I was able to trace out the shape of the top flap, leaving about an inch around the design. Now, for the dimensions of that top flap, I just kept it the same width, the 13 inches, as the front and back panel there. And I didn't care too much about the length, I just made it long enough so that I can cut off any of the excess until I liked kind of the amount it hung down. Ultimately, in the real bag, that back panel is going to continue on into that flap, so I just needed to tape it into place so that I knew how long that had to be when it was finished. Again, seat of my pants on this one. It was also at this time that I designed the pockets, which just consisted of a single front panel and 2 side gussets. Again, I wasn't picky on the size, I just wanted something that would fit in that space nicely. With all of these cuts done and a significant amount of tape and clips, I was able to see exactly how this bag would go together. And this is super important stuff. Doing this really allowed me to play with all the panels kind of in 3-dimensional space and see some of the pitfalls that I had to worry about. I know it feels like a whole process, like you're building a whole separate bag, but the amount of time you save doing this later on is like worth its weight in gold. Not only that, but messing up with the EVA foam or maybe cardboard if that's all you have, not that big of an investment. Messing up with leather? That's a bad day. All right, so now that I'm confident with the basics of my design here, we can move on to using actual leather. For this project, I picked up this side of 6-ounce veg tan leather. And using my measurements from the template I made, I was able to cut everything out pretty quickly. Then, of course, I went through the whole rigmarole of treating the edges with my edge beveler. Now again, for that detail work, I could have just cut it out, but because I was using such thin leather, the Cricut cutter could actually handle that too. Seriously, if you don't have a Cricut cutter, I recommend that investment. I love that tool. Now this project is far and away the largest leathercraft project I've ever done. Not just like in size, like my apron and stuff is bigger, but it's just so many pieces. So to help smooth up the kind of processing of the edges here, I just attached the slicker to my drill press and used that to press down the edges and give me a nice professional look. Using that trick, I was able to mill through all of these pieces in pretty short order. And again, there are a lot of pieces. And that isn't even all of them. Like, as I go, I realize I need like other pieces, and I had to keep milling stuff as I moved. You'll see as we go, but there's a lot of leather in this project. Cool, so with everything cut, I just used a spray bottle with some water in it to evenly mist over everything and get the surface nice and moist. This just helps this dark brown leather dye I'm using go on a little bit more evenly. Once that was all dyed up, it was back to some edge work using some gum tragacanth and my drill press trick here to smooth out those edges and make it look real professional. And with that, all these beautiful pieces of leather are dyed and ready to go. Now again, referring back to our artwork here, you can see those really nice pops of yellow throughout the bag. I couldn't find a leather dye that had that really bright pop to it, and I had toyed for a moment with painting this, but then I decided to try something new that I hadn't done yet. So I went ahead and bought 3 yards of this duck canvas of the same color. It's a really beautiful shade of yellow, and the material is super rugged and should hold up to the beating I'm inevitably gonna give it. Now, I also thought it would be cool that rather than just having those pops of color on the outside, that the bag itself was actually lined with that color. So when you opened it up, that kind of continued inside. Again though, this is a thing I'd never done before, so to get started, I laid down my leather on top of the fabric and then just cut a swath of it out to size. Next, I added some of this Aleene's permanent tacky spray to the back of my leather. Then I simply positioned it on top of the fabric and smoothed everything into place. With that all good and stuck, I went around the outside of my leather with an X-Acto blade, removing all of the excess fabric. And I really dig how cleanly that came out. Happy with how that looks, I went ahead and did it to all of the rest of my pieces except for the gussets. I left the gussets bare just because they're gonna flex and move the most, and I was afraid that the glue would let go over time. Speaking of the glue, it is a good spray. I think actually next time though, I would use the 3M Super 77. It just seems way more aggressively tacky and permanent than this spray is. This one, if you kind of get caught on the fabric or give it a good pull, you can start to strip it away from the leather. Let me know if any of you more experienced out there have any other recommendations of a good way to stick a fabric down to the leather without kind of having a liquid bleed through that material and get kind of spotty. Now, because on those finer detail pieces, I didn't want to use the spray because I was afraid overspray would wrap around and get the front all sticky. I instead used this bottle tacky glue as I could apply that with just a little bit more finesse. That was stuck onto the fabric as well, and I didn't film it, but I put something on top of it just to make sure everything stayed nice and flat. And once cut out, it leaves me with this really cool pop of color coming through that detail work. I love how nice that looks. Now, as I said, that glue sticks on well, but I was worried about like where you reach into the bag, if you have like a watch on or your sleeve gets stuck, that it would start to rip off over time. To help fight against that, I decided any of the edges that were kind of facing the outside should be lined with a small rim of leather on the inside. Making this was super easy. I just laid my leather down and traced along the outside onto another piece of leather. Then I used a compass and followed along that line to give me a 1/2 inch wide version of that shape. Then once all those were cut out, I just went ahead and dyed them up to color match. I then used the same compass trick just to tell me where my glue would have to lie. Once everything was all glued up, I just stuck it all together using contact adhesive. Though, since it is such a high use area, I didn't want to just depend on adhesive. Also, I really just kind of needed an excuse to use my new leather sewing machine. If I'm honest, this whole project was kind of an excuse to use this thing. I got it real recently, you can watch this episode for the setup here, but this whole episode is kind of my excuse to be able to use this thing. Using it, I just sewed along that whole edge, holding all of the leather together. And this thing worked like a dream. Honestly, if I ended up sewing this whole bag together by hand, I'd still be there sewing. There's a lot of stitches that go into this bag. Now for that cool lacy detailed work, that I just stuck in place using some contact adhesive. And seriously, look at how slick that came out. That is a dope little pocket flap right there. I'm proud of that. Now, since that is a pocket flap, it's gonna be opened and closed a lot, the actual edge of that is gonna end up getting a lot of stress. So for really high stress movement areas like that, I decided to add a little strip of leather to help bear that load. I just used some of this double-sided tanner's tape to help hold it into position. Now all I had to do was measure where the pocket would sit on that side panel and add a little bit of tanner's tape there too to hold it into place. Then I just made it permanent with my sewing machine. Now though I find hand stitching tedious, the real benefit of it is the saddle stitch. If you were to break one of your stitches, all of the other stitches in that line can hold independently. With a sewing machine, those lock stitches, if you break that stitch anywhere along the line, the whole thing can unthread. So to try to compensate for that, I just doubled up on my stitches along that flap connection point. And with that, we have this sweet little pocket flap here that's holding on really strongly. Unfortunately, a pocket flap is useless. There isn't a little pocket underneath it for to flap. You understand what I mean. To put my pockets into place, all I did was take the pocket's front panels and line up their edges with the pieces cut to be the side gussets. These I decided to rivet at their corners just to add a little bit of extra strength so when my meaty hands are trying to get into the pocket, I'm not ripping the corners apart. I will admit, I did a less good job stitching here. I'm still learning the machine. Cut me some slack. That being said, it was the perfect shape to throw in a little rivet here to make it look like I meant to do it. Nobody's even gonna know, except for you. And you're not gonna tell anybody, right? And honestly, really strong. I'm happy with how well those double stitch lines seem to hold. Plus, I don't know, I think they look really slick too. Of course, I followed suit and did exactly the same thing on all of the rest of the pockets. And again, on the front panel here, I added this piece of leather strip along the top just to help hold that lining into place. Now, to actually put the body of the bag together is pretty much exactly the same steps we did to put those pockets together. I just stuck the edges of the gusset to the back panel first with my tanner's tape. Then I locked the corners in with some rivets and sewed it all along its edge with my machine. After both of my gussets were stuck firm to the back panel, I just repeated all those steps to stick on the front. And now it's starting to look like a little backpack here. It's the right shapes, all the little flaps close and look right. Though, the astute of you may notice, the bag and all of the little pockets lack bottoms. This is by design, for we are not making some commoner's bag. No, we are making the bag of excellent expansion. And to make it expand, I decided to bust out our duck cloth again. Basically, I'm gonna make separate little bags and pouches out of that cloth, which will attach to the main bag itself. This whole assembly will then be able to be pushed up into the bag, becoming kind of the floor of the bag, and able to expand back out whenever I need more room for like treasure and such. Now to make my little canvas bags, all I did was exactly the same steps I did to make my main bag here. I just cut out 4 panels, you know, a front and back one and then the 2 side gussets, and then sewed them together. This left me with a little tube O canvas that is just big enough to fit the inside of my bag. The thought is to attach it via rivets to the bottom inside of my bag, and then attach leather straps around the bottom rim of that bag just to hide where those are and give it a place to fold up into. As such, I opted to add some leather strips all around the edge of the canvas just to give my connection points a lot more stability and strength. I made tiny versions of the same things to match all of the pockets. Again, just big enough to fit snugly inside of each space. Now, because I'm a monster and will be rough with this thing, I decided to wax all of my canvas. This is gonna make it a little bit more rugged and waterproof to boot. This is already gonna be a long video, so I'm not gonna go over how to do that here. If you wanna know how to wax canvas, check out this video right here. Now, with all of that done, my tubes O canvas have the same problem as the main bag in that they don't have a bottom. To fix that, I cut a square of leather 1/2 inch larger on all sides than the bottom of the bag. These lines here represent the actual footprint of the bag. Where those lines cross at the corners, I cut the little square there out. Then I carefully ran my razor knife along those lines just deep enough to score the leather, a little bit less than halfway through. This gives the leather a natural breaking point so that when I wet the opposite side, it'll give me a nice sharp bend around all of those lines. And to help keep it into shape, I just punched holes on each side of those corners and sewed them in place with some wax thread. And once everything was all dyed up, I had the main bottom of the bag and the 3 bottoms of the pockets. Also, just as an aside, those would make really good like little table trays or something, right? Like a place to hold your keys and wallets. Bonus skill! Now I also took the opportunity here to dye up like a whole bunch of straps of various sizes. Basically ranging in size from like 1/2 inch wide all the way up to 2 inches wide. Mostly because I was flying by the seat of my pants and I didn't know how many different straps I would need to finish this. But I ended up using all of the ones that I made. Just all of them. Anyways, back to it. This is how those little bottoms are gonna work. As you can see, they snugly fit right into the bottom of our little canvas socks here. All I'm gonna do is use a strap to wrap around the bottom edge and then sew through everything to hold it all into place. Again, there's kind of a steep learning curve with this sewing machine, but I am phenomenally happy with how this came out. Even just sewing the bottoms onto these little bags would have taken me just forever. Like 2 minutes, not even with this machine. So happy. And the finished result on these things were super clean and really strong. Side note also, this is just a fun way to make a bag. Like if you made a little cinch top to it with a little leather bottom, another bonus skill. A lot of little side skills that make up this bag. Okay, so now to attach all these little sacks that we've made to the bag itself, Again, for the largest one, I decided the best way to do that was with rivets all along the edge. So with that in mind, I punched holes evenly spaced all around the edge of the bag. Then to keep that bottom edge looking clean and to give a little extra space for the bottom to hide into, I decided to use 2-inch straps of leather just along the rim. So I punched holes into that piece to match what I had punched into the canvas bag. I also used that as a template so that I knew where to punch my holes in the main body of the bag as well. Then shoving my anvil in there to give myself a good striking surface, all I had to do was send some rivets through all pieces of material and lock them all into place. Then just as a finishing touch, I used some wax thread to secure where the corners met and cut everything flush. Now to connect the little sacks that fit into the pockets though, I had to go a completely different route. The problem was I didn't have any hard surface that I can kind of fit in there so I can lock it into place with rivets that wouldn't end up marring up all of my leather. To get around that, I decided to use these little screw attachments here I found at Tandy Leather. It basically comes in 2 parts. One side is a screw and the other side is a little threaded tube with teeth on it. So first, to get the holes into place that I would use to hold everything together, I just used a really sharp awl and punched a couple holes straight through the front panel and all the way through the main body of the bag. Then I punched some complementary holes in the little bags themselves. Then using my little screw attachments, I was able to lock all of my little bags right into place. Now at first I was kind of miffed about how I had to do this, but it kind of opens up a cool different option. What I think I want to do eventually is I'm going to take those little pockets out and make them so they can cinch shut. Then if you really wanted to, you can just kind of unscrew the things that hold them and take those pouches by themselves. So if you had a tiny sack of gold, you wanted to keep it in your bag for safekeeping, but then you had to go to the market, you don't got to bring your whole bag, you just bring that one little pouch. I think it's cool. I think it's a good idea. And with that, we have a really cool design shaping up. I really like the way the outside of the bag is looking, and my little pockets extend easily and are really quite strong. And as you can see, all of the bottoms fit into the spaces they belong to really well. The only problem is there's nothing holding them into place. They just kind of want to fall open. Now, I didn't want to add a lot of buckles because I don't have a lot of clean space there, and I was afraid it was going to make it look really cluttered. So instead, I decided to use these little stud buttons here. They work kind of the same way as that little screw assembly. There's a little thread that threads right into the back of that button. I just had to punch a hole and screw it right into place. Then all I did was connect this little strap of leather with a buttonhole in it. And just that easy, we were able to secure all of the bottoms of our pockets. And I really like how simple these look. Now I wanted to have the same look for the bottom of the bag there to keep everything consistent, but I realized that strap could serve double duty and work as like a base for the actual shoulder straps you use to hold the backpack. So to do that, I just passed leather strips underneath the bag and marked out where some rivets would go to secure it on the backside. With those all locked into place, we now have a strap that continues all the way under the bag to be buttoned on the front side, holding the bottom into place. Again, this gives me a slick little access point that holds really strongly and can be removed in a hurry in case you need that excess space. Then on the other side of the straps, I just attached these small buckles here. The thought is that the end of the shoulder strap will have kind of a belt configuration with holes in it, so you can tighten it or loosen it as much as you need. But now that we have like a bottom connection point for those straps, we need a top connection point as well. To do this, I actually found this really cool ring assembly here at Tandy Leather that you can just lock into place with some rivets. Tandy Leather, I've mentioned your name just a whole bunch during this whole episode. You're killing me. Bam, hashtag Tandy Leather with this video or something and tell them they gotta sponsor me, yo. A lot of free advertisement for them. Now for the actual shoulder straps here, I just attached some of these little clippy hooks onto some strips of leather. The other side, I punched holes every ½ inch to make a little belt. Now that's all well and good, but the straps are a little bit thin and I was afraid that as you put stuff in the backpack, it was actually gonna start to cut into my shoulders a bit. So to get around that, I just used these 1.5 inch strips with slits cut at the top and the bottom. This allows the strap to slide through one of those holes, run along the top of the wider leather, and then out the bottom strip. Then I just locked it into place with a few rivets. Okay, at this point, we're almost there. We just need a way to keep all of our little pocket flaps closed. Again, I didn't want to add a whole bunch of buckles and stuff because I thought it would make everything look really cluttered. That's when I realized that we can double up on those little stud buttons there. All I had to do was rivet on a little strip of leather with a little buttonhole in it. That works great. It holds the cover shut and everything looks super clean and tidy. Now for the main closure of that bag, I decided to use this cabochon that I had lying around. To actually attach that to the bag, I just cut out this little disc O leather here and punched 3 holes in it. The middle one would accept the screw from the cabochon, and the other 2 would allow me to rivet it into place right in the middle of the bag. Once that was secure, I was able to just screw the cabochon back into place. Finally, again, to match our drawing here, I punched 6 holes along the top center of that main flap. Then I added some grommets to each one of those holes and locked them into place with the recommended anvil and striker. This allows me to run some cordage in a crisscross pattern through each one of those grommets, and then finally around the cabochon to secure the bag shut. And with that, our bag of excellent expansion is complete. I love how this thing came out. Look at how slick that is. And those pops of yellow. Like, seriously, this thing is so slick. I'm really happy with how it came out. Not only that, but check it out. Just unstrip it and ta-da! Expansion! I click it open and all little flaps open up. And then, oh dear, my cell phone won't fit in. Expansion! I love this bag. This thing brought me so far out of my comfort zone, like I had no idea what I was doing for the most of it. And I think that is great, and I highly recommend you try that at some point. Definitely pick a project that's kind of too big of a bite for you to swallow, right? It forces you to try to do different things and approach things in different ways, and at the end, even if this isn't like a perfect bag or whatever, which is a dope bag, I'm not gonna lie. But the next thing I make is gonna be so much better because of the mistakes and the things I learned from doing this project. Oh, I love it so much. Honestly comfortable too. It's such a good bag. All right, again, if you like what I did and all that, thumbs up, subscribe, you know the YouTube drill. And if there's anything you'd like to see me tackle on the show, why don't you leave it in the comments and I will add it to the list here. All right, I must go. There's treasure to be found, and I now have ample room to keep it in. In the meantime, though, keep leveling up, you. You stuck around to the end, brave adventurer. You clearly have what it takes to be a hero. If you wish to be my hero and join the ranks of these amazing people, why don't you consider joining my Patreon? Without these noble souls, this show wouldn't be able to take place. I owe them my life. If that is far too much commitment for you, I understand. Why don't you try clicking on one of these videos here and just keep on watching. That helps too.